Before we get started with today's interview, just a quick reminder, click the thumbs up, make sure you subscribe, and ding the bell so that you don't miss any of the great interviews that we have coming up. Now, on to today's interview. Welcome back, everybody. I am so excited to introduce my guest today, who really honestly needs no introduction. The fabulous Diane Hidy is with us. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you.
Thank you
you
so
for
much.
having me. I'm very happy to be here.
We're just delighted that you are taking time out of your busy day to talk to us. So I want to start by getting to know you just a little bit as a composer and as a musician. So do you come from a musical family?
It's funny, when I was a kid, I used to say I didn't. But then I realized that just because nobody in my family was employed as a professional musician, I actually did. So my dad was a pastor, and he had earned his way through seminary playing in a dance band. And I grew up about 50% on classical music and about 50% on jazz. So the house was just full of all of this jazz music. And my dad, because he was a pastor, he did all kinds of choral singing, and he had this really amazing voice and the ability to pick up any instrument that he wanted and pick notes out of the air and just sing. So he always sang the liturgy, and there's just a lot of music in my house. My mom also played the piano. So when the neighborhood piano teacher would not accept me as a student, my mom, I know it's kind of funny, huh? My mom started teaching me until they finally broke her down, and she took me as a student. So yeah, there was a lot of music in my household. Not like, my parents didn't play in the symphony or something like that, but it was definitely a very, very musical environment to grow up in. Yeah.
That is really cool. So your mom started teaching you, and then they eventually worked on that local teacher to accept you as a student.
Yep.
What were those first lessons like?
They were fun because I liked the attention, but, I had perfect pitch and I could play by ear. So all I did was just wait until somebody played it for me, and then I just played. So I didn't learn how to play. I didn't learn how to sight read at all until I was really in junior high, which was really stupid because I was doing things like playing Mendelssohn Concerto. And I just was in over my head all the time when I was little. So when I was about 10, we moved from San Francisco to Seattle. And then I got a teacher who was much more disciplined and helped me understand a lot more about what I needed to do to be a decent musician. And actually, I sort of credit junior high band with making me a good sight reader. Because that's where I actually sort of learned that, they're actually specific. Because I kind of just would use my intuition. That one's that line note. I think that's a G, And so, I think school music teachers do a lot. And sometimes people like me kind of pass as people who can do a lot of things, but nobody bothered to really ever teach me how to read until I was in junior high. And then I finally became a really good reader.
What did you play in band, if I can ask?
I played flute and piccolo.
Excellent.
I'm pretty bad at them. I was never very good at them. I was good enough to be first chair when I was in junior high, but then by the time I got to high school, I was singing more and doing way, way more piano stuff. So I sort of slipped to the back end of the flute section because I was really bad.
So at what point in this journey, this musical journey, do you begin to realize that this is going to be something that is really your main focus in life, that you're very, very interested? This is going to be your career path?
I don't really actually feel like I ever made that decision. It was just, I just kept getting rid of other things. I was definitely interested in many other things. And I never, when I was in school, when I was in the places that were the most limited in the sense that they were conservatories, things like that, I was probably the least happy in those circumstances. And I liked the schools that were more academic because I found it more interesting. But I never really felt like I made a decision. It was like I would just keep trying stuff and then it would work and I'd go, oh, that's cool. Just kept going down that road. One of the things that I do in my studio that I think is a little bit different than what many people do. First of all, I teach a lot of adults and I teach a lot of really advanced avocational adults. But one of the things I do is the kids that I have that are advanced, and I only have a handful of them right now, but I've done this for all the years that I've taught, when the kids get to be in high school, I have them come to my adult classes. And the reason that I have them come to the adult classes is not to make the adults look bad, which they do sometimes. But the reason I do it is because I think it's really good for kids to see adults out in the world. They might be a cardiologist, or they might be a famous scientist, or, I don't know, an engineering prof at Stanford or something. Those are like all real people that I teach. But the opportunity for them to interact with those people, and the kids get sort of treated like adults, right? Because, it's one of those sort of moments where it's a transitional thing, but they also get to see how people fit music into their lives. And I think that has been a wonderful way for these kind of transitions to happen. And then, I have students that come back. I have one that's going to be here this week who's moved to New York, and he's working as a visual artist. But when he comes back, he still wants to come back and take lessons, and he's still playing really hard pieces. And that's what makes me feel good, as a teacher, is that you give someone a skill, you help them develop and hone a skill, and then they use it for the rest of their life. And worrying about what they're going to do with it, in the sense of, are they going to be a concert pianist? I mean, I just don't even have those conversations because they're so silly.
I love that. And what a cool way to support students in becoming lifelong musicians, and not necessarily focusing so much on the outcome and the career path, but just building people who love music and who want to play for their whole life long.
Right. Or compose, or do all the things that they want to do. And, really trying to encourage people to explore whatever the things that interest them at that time are, without thinking, oh, well, that's going to do this. Because the thing is, I mean, like, one of my more advanced kids that I'm teaching right now has gotten really interested in jazz. And so he has a jazz teacher now, and he went to Interlochen and did the jazz intensive thing there. And he went to Stanford and did the jazz thing there. And he's coming for a lesson this afternoon, and I have no idea what he's going to do. Like, is he going to come in and play Bill Evans, or is he going to come in and I'm going to work on Prokofiev? I don't know. But all of those are fine. They're all good things.
I want to turn the conversation back to you a little bit. And I want to know, when did you start composing, and what were the circumstances under which you started writing music?
That's sort of an interesting question. The first compositions, I suppose I'd have to fess up to them, were songs I wrote for guitar, like with terrible lyrics, like pop songs, not pop songs, kind of folky kinds of things. And I wrote really bad lyrics, and they were very melodramatic. And no, I won't sing any of them for you. But that's when I first started doing writing, was when I was in high school, in junior high and in high school. And then, in one of those weird turns of fate, my dad heard me singing one of these songs and told me I'd written a really awkward melody, which I had. It started off with an octave leap up, which was not, the most normal thing, but it was kind of a cool melody. But it made me really self-conscious, and I didn't write again then for a long time. And, I always did lots of arranging and playing pop music and all kinds of things like that. But I didn't really sit down and start actually composing music for students until I started writing the Attention Grabber series, which I wrote specifically I started writing it for one of my students who had attention issues and just couldn't use anything that could be even vaguely described as boring. It had to have some snap to it. It had to have some rhythm. It had to have something going on to hold on to her attention. And that's when I started really writing, with a purpose. And, I didn't know what I was going to do with any of these things. I just started writing them. And then I got really into it, and I think I discovered I was both good at it, and I had an eye for the kinds of things that trip students up, and for finding ways to get things to be truly interesting to students without having them be overwhelmed with difficulty. Because there were certain kinds of difficulty that I really felt more like traps for students. And I try really hard not to make traps for my students.
And that makes perfect sense. And one of the things that I love about your compositions is that they fit so beautifully into the hands, and they are so rewarding to play because they are perfect pedagogically in terms of what they present, but then they're also really musical and really, really interesting. And I think that's why they're so alluring for students, and they do grab your attention. It's the perfect title of a book. It's just like
they didn't want to use that title, by the way.
Huh.
They said they thought it was awful. Excuse me. And they didn't want the word grabber. They thought that was terrible. And I said, I don't care. That's what we're going to call them. So, and of course, they've been selling really well for a long time and people like them. And it's also a memorable title, right?
What is your process when you're composing a piece like the ones that are in the Attention Grabbers books?
I usually just start by improvising. And I used to try to improvise into Sibelius. I used to try to write straight into Sibelius. And then Elisa Milne pointed out to me, honey, you don't really need to do that. Just put on a file and play. She was like, you can just transcribe it, which is what I do more of. But, I'll sit down and, play for a long time and just see what kind of germs I can come up with, what little pieces of things I want. And then I'll take it and put it into Sibelius and see if I have something that I really want. But as you were pointing out, I think the first and foremost thing that I try to do is have things be comfortable, have them be natural, so that whatever you want to do is the thing you're supposed to do, right? So that you don't have to keep overcoming this sense of, this would feel right, but I'm not supposed to do that. I have to remember this certain thing. So, for instance, for me, something that would be a trap would be, you play 1, 2, 3 and cross one under, and you do it 3 times. And then on the 4th time, you're supposed to go all the way to your 4th finger, because this time you're going to extend up or something. And I actually have a very specific set of rules inside of my head for the ways that I compose when I'm composing at that level, which is, what I think of as sort of my sweet spot, which is sort of late elementary, early intermediate. I mean, I could write really hard stuff. And I like doing that, but it's just not as useful, I don't think. I think if I write things that are more complicated, I don't think it's really going to change the world. But I think having, the month songs be accessible and exciting and really rewarding, I think is just better for me. It works better for me.
And I love those sort of insights into your creative process and how you think about it a little bit. And I also hear you kind of placing some restrictions on yourself as you compose, that you're actively avoiding those traps. What role do restrictions play in your overall creative process when composing?
The first thing is that I don't write anything unless it's musically interesting. And so musically interesting means it has to have a rhythm. When I think of the things that just make, they're like fingernails on the blackboard to me, it's the piece that you give a kid that goes da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 da. It's all quarter notes, and the kid's not interested in it, and they never move, and nothing happens. And people think, well, it's simple because the rhythm is all the same. That's actually a complete fallacy, right? The fallacy is that it's easy because it's not difficult. And what ends up happening for me is I actually find the difficulty is what makes things easy. The actual something that captures your attention, captures your imagination, and hopefully anything that's got a hook in it. So I try to write pieces that have a hook, just like a pop song, just because I think it's really important to have something that's worth playing, that's worth playing to whomever the audience is, right? So if it's a 7-year-old, that the 7-year-old wants to play it. So those are the kinds of restrictions I place on myself. First of all, don't be boring. Be interesting in whatever way I think will be appealing. And I think also just not to ever dumb anything down. That was one of the best pieces of advice anybody ever gave me, was don't dumb anything down. And that is tricky because you might think that means everything has to be complicated, but what it really means is that you have to walk this tightrope. It's like you have to find this thing of actual interest that doesn't overwhelm them, but gives them enough to hold on to. And that's where I think a lot of people really miss out, is that they don't challenge themselves to make things as interesting as possible without making them overwhelming. And that's where the rub is. That's where I spend all my time and energy.
How did you connect with your publishers?
Oh, that's an interesting story. Well, I connected with Chose, my first publisher, because I was making a lot of recordings for that company. So I was making all the recordings that go with Keith Snell's books. And then I also started making all the recordings for Jane Bastian's repertoire series. So I made eventually all 6 of them. She put together the last one shortly before she died. So I knew them from that. And then Keith asked me to write Piano Town with him. And so I started to do that. And there was some composing that went with that. So I was the one who wrote all the lyrics and all the duets and did all the art concepts. So I did, I was doing a fair amount of composing, just of a certain kind. And then I just decided that I would, talk to them about doing the Attention Grabbers books, and they jumped at it. So that's how I came to do that particular product with them, and the other products that I've done with them. And then more recently, I have been friends with Wendy Stevens for a really long time. We've been friends for many, many years. And during COVID, actually, we were just talking, and she asked me if I wanted to have a conversation with her and her husband. And so we sat down and had this big conversation, and she asked me if I'd be interested in publishing some things on her site, which was a big deal because she'd never asked anyone to do that before. And I'd never really considered doing it. I had done self-publishing. I had a lot of things that I had self-published that I was selling on my website, but I didn't really love that piece of it. And so anyway, she asked me if I would do that. And I said, sure, let's try it. And so the first thing we did was all the month songs. And, it was, to be honest, during COVID, I was living up on kind of a couple hours north of San Francisco, up on the coast in Jenner, in a town that has 106 people. So it was a little bit lonesome. So I was teaching remotely and, spending my days at the beach. And it was a kind of a lonesome time. And working with Wendy was the best part of that entire thing, because she was so fun to work with, and we would laugh, and she was a ruthless editor and an incredible perfectionist. And, we just had a fantastic time doing it, and working with her there's just been no glitches. It's just been a really, really joyful experience for me.
Well, that is really cool that you took that relationship that you had for so many years, and that ended up turning into something where it was an opportunity to publish. And I think that's one of the takeaways for me from hearing from all of these different composers, is that you kind of put yourself out there and you make connections and you meet people, and eventually some good things are going to happen for you. And a moment ago, you mentioned all those recordings that you made for the Chose company.
Yeah.
And that was how I first came across your name, because I bought them as CDs for my students to share back when they were CDs. But now they're available for free on the Chose website. And I think that they're such an amazing resource. You recorded hundreds and hundreds of pieces. And so
hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like
I will link
50
them in the
or
description.
60 CDs or something. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's a ridiculous amount of material.
And it's so well done. And the thing that I really love about those recordings is that you're a virtuosic player, but you play them in a way that is appropriate and approachable for students to play.
That's a really a dicey thing to do. So there were a lot of decisions that had to be made during that process of, because I couldn't play things like the simplest music. I couldn't play it as slowly as a child might without sounding like an idiot, right? So if it was something super, super, super simple, you had to go a little faster. But then everything else, the sonatinas, the inventions, all those kinds of things, we tried to pick tempos that were what a really good student would be able to do. And it was hard, sometimes, because I love to play fast. And so trying to discipline myself to make something that wouldn't scare a student. So that was what I always thought. I always thought, if you were going to play this recording for a student to inspire them, would this inspire them or would it frighten them? That was the would it make them think, I really want to play that, or would it just sound like something they could never achieve? And so, that was the place. And then, some things I just had to play. They're just some things that are just really fast and fun, because if you're going to bother to play them, you have, if you're more advanced, so there's no like Chopin etudes that are, a quarter note equals an hour or anything like that. But we did try to find reasonable tempos that, like I said, we wanted to have them be inspiring. That was the goal.
Well, they're an amazing resource, and I have enjoyed them, and my students have listened to them for years. And I want to let lots and lots and lots of people know about them, because they're just so well done.
Well, thank you.
What advice do you have for aspiring composers, aspiring musicians who are hoping to emulate some of your success?
So what I would say to anybody who wants to express themselves through music is find people who believe in you. Find somebody who really actually likes you and likes what you do. And I think for me, one of the things that was the most difficult was that I had all these different interests. So I was really interested in pop music. I was really interested in movie music. I liked choral music. I was a voice major for a while when I was in college. And my first real money-making jobs were all singing jobs.
Huh.
Yeah. So I always felt like I ended up very kind of fragmented in my presentation to people. So I was like this, super serious classical pianist, and I studied with all the best people. And, I went to Juilliard and I went to USC and I studied with Fleischer and I studied with Perry and I did all of that stuff. Okay. So that part, the classical people could understand, right? But there was all this other stuff that I was really interested in. I was really interested in show tunes and I was interested in musicals, and I just had so many other interests, but I ended up feeling very fragmented. Like I did a live radio show for, I think, 12 years where I was kind of like a sidekick to the main host, and I would play people on and play them off. And, I met all kinds of famous people and did all this really interesting stuff. But nobody from the classical world would really know that I was doing this other thing, right? And I remember one time I went to, I was going to play a concert in Michigan, of all places. And the weekend before that, I had been doing my radio show, and I used to play this character named Chloe, the French chef, who was this very sort of silly woman. And she, we were having a water crisis, and her suggestion was that we should shower with white wine. I mean, she was just really, that was how we would solve the water shortage. And she was really kind of a goofball. And anyway, so I went to Michigan and I was working with this conductor, and he went to give this downbeat just in the rehearsal before the orchestra came in. And then he turned to me and he said, "How is Chloe, the French chef?" And I didn't know what to do. I was 2,000 miles away from home, and I thought, how the hell does this guy know that I do a radio drama every week? Like, what is this? And it, of course it turned out he'd been in the Bay Area the week before, and he happened to have turned on public radio and heard me. But what I'm saying is, if you ask me a question like, how could somebody emulate my success? You can't. You have to be yourself, because if you're me, I'm going to have a different set of skills and a different set of interests, right? So I think the idea of trying to be successful first is always a bad idea. The better idea is to just try to be yourself and not overlook the things that you do that you think aren't that special because you can do them easily. They might come to you easily, but they still might be really, really special. So like the radio show, one of the reasons I like the radio show is because one of the things I can do is just play whatever anybody just played. So like, I remember one time Mare Winningham, is that her name? She made a movie called Georgia. She played she's been in all kinds of stuff. Anyway, she was on with her band and she'd just written this new song and she played the song. And then as they were leaving the stage, I just kept playing the song. And I got off stage afterwards and she said, "Whoa, how did you do that? Because I just wrote the song, and how could you have gotten the music?" And I said, that's just, my useless talent. But finding places to use all your fun, useless talent is part of the joy of life, I think. And I was raised in an atmosphere where I felt kind of like I should apologize for wanting to do all those things and for my sense of humor and, all of those things that I've grown to really like about myself instead of trying to hide them. But I don't think anybody should ever go, say, I want to be like Diane Hidy. I mean, if you want to be like Diane Hidy, just think, I want to be as much myself as Diane is herself. Right? That's the goal, right? Because, I'm not Steph Curry, right? Steph Curry has a strangely wonderful set of basketball skills that I do not have. And, if he tried to be me, that would be bizarre, right? So I think that anything you can do to just hone your skills and try things out, that's where all the beauty is and all the fun is.
I love every word of that advice. That is just phenomenal.
Well, I don't know if it's phenomenal, but I do think that people tend to think of advising young people as helping them find their path, like that there's a path and there are lots of different paths and you have to figure out the path to be on, as opposed to just finding out who you are and then you can go wherever you want. Like it's not a path. You're not choosing, option B from the branching story. You're just doing, if you look at you, what do? You do a bunch of things that really shouldn't theoretically go together, right? They're not exactly normal, right? In terms of what would this be a career path? What degrees would I get to do that? It's not necessarily a straightforward thing. But what ends up happening is your skills, by trying all the different things you do, like I, played for a lot of theater and I played for a lot of improv and did a lot of comedy, things like that. They made me a better composer, right? Because I experimented with different kinds of sounds and, I just think it's almost like there's no bad experience. Obviously there are some experiences that are bad, but even if something really goes wrong, sometimes you go, wow, I really want to try that again because that was going to be a good thing if I could get it. Or you might say, no, never. I mean, like one summer I worked for Chevron and I had this temporary job where I wrote letters to people who complained about dirty bathrooms. I worked in the steno pool. As you might think, I was a really fast typist, right? And they wanted to hire me on as a full-time employee. And I said, no, and this will be the last job I ever have. I will never, ever have a job. And guess what? I never had a job because I didn't want to ever do anything like that. That was such a poor, I sat there thinking, this is the worst use of my talents. This is like the lowest common denominator of what I have to offer. So I just told them to go away.
Just soul sucking, it sounds like.
It is. It was. But even that was very valuable in that it taught me that I didn't want to work for a large corporation. There were a lot of things about it that I learned from, and I never questioned that ever again.
Well, I think that's wonderful. You can take those lessons away from even what was a bad experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what are your feelings about digitally distributed books?
Well, it's interesting because I have all of the books that I published with Chose. Then I have some things that I self-published for a while, and now I do things through Compose Create, Wendy Stevens' business. And, you know, there are some things that it's really great to have a book. You know, I will never turn in my Beethoven sonatas for, a downloaded something or other. But I think that keeping the cost of printing and distribution out of the equation makes it possible for people to have what we call studio licenses, where they buy the piece once and they can use it forever. And as somebody who has had my music, photocopied gleefully, and the number of times I go around the country and somebody brings in a Xerox copy of one of my attention grabbers and comes in to play it for me, and the teachers say how happy they are and they love this book, and they've only bought one copy and they're just Xeroxing it for their students. So I think that the cost of printed pedagogical materials particularly has gotten really, really expensive. It's gotten really, really expensive. And so I really have felt for the teachers, including myself, where you buy something and you don't want to Xerox it because, like for me, my best friend wrote it or something. And yet at the same time, you're so aware that you're passing on these costs again and again. And then there's the whole problem of there's one piece in a book that costs $10, but you really like that one piece and that's the only book that it's in or whatever. I mean, there's just a lot of problems with the publishing industry. And the other thing is the people who are doing all the creative work get the smallest piece of it. Right. So my contracts with my, regular publisher make me nowhere near as much money as the digital publishing that I do because the piece is bigger. Right. So the pros that I see about it is that I think the teachers want very much to do right by people like me. I don't think that their hearts are in the wrong place and they're trying to cheat people. I really don't think that. But there was no kind of compromise between buying everybody a copy of the book, which started to become prohibitive, and just Xeroxing it, which also didn't feel right. So I think for many teachers, they didn't feel like they had good alternatives. And so I think particularly for, resources that are short, 2 or 3 page pieces with pretty covers or whatever, as long as you have a decent printer, you can use those pieces as many times as you want and you only purchase them once. It can be a really great value. The downsides can be things like it's hard to keep track of them, which is one thing that Wendy does really well because they have everything that you've bought. You can go back and download it. If you want to download it 50 times, it doesn't matter if you kept control of it in a poor way on your computer, which I fess up to. I do that all the time. But it's also allowed for the digital publishing has allowed for a much more even playing field because people like me and people like Wendy could compete with the big publishers. And I think the big publishers have been quite surprised at how successful some of us have become. And the other thing is, because the lead times are much shorter and there's no actual distribution piece of it that's involved, we were able to do things like during COVID, I was composing music and making started making these files called Master It Faster, which were basically a teaching plan for every single piece, like teach this measure and then teach this measure. And because it was all downloadable, it wasn't the kind of things that you could print in an actual book, right? Because it may or may not be useful to every student. And in fact, at one point, I tried to talk my regular publisher, I tried to talk Chose into doing teaching tips for the attention grabbers, and they wouldn't do it. They were like, no, that's ridiculous. No one would want that. And I kept thinking, I don't know that that's actually true, right? Because a composer showing you how to do things can be so invaluable, right? You don't necessarily know. It's a new piece to you too, right? So I have been incredibly happy with my digital publishing arrangement. I think partly because I think Wendy's an absolutely wonderful businesswoman and a lovely human being. The other thing is we respond really quickly to what the teachers tell us. So, like, I have been publishing these smart scales. I don't know if you know what those are, but it's a scale product that teaches scales, but it also teaches musicality because there are these beautiful accompaniments that I wrote for each one of them. And as soon as the first edition of it dropped, the teachers were like, and we want this, and we want this, and we want this, and please do this way. And also and so like, for instance, when we did the first major scale, I did white key majors. That was the first one that we did. And the people said, they asked for scale reference sheets. They said, can you please include, reference sheets that give regular, just a plain sheet that has a C major scale or a D major scale or whatever. And so what did we do? Well, we brought out, when we did the black keys, then we retrofitted the first ones with the same things and then included them in every other one. So now I just did minors, and they include all of the forms of the minor scales for each key, right? So or even funny things like the way that I published them, I just did them in order, like C, D, E, F, G, whatever. And then teachers will say things like, I prefer to teach them in, going around the circle of fifths. And so I put the book together this way for my students. So you have a kind of flexibility that you start to realize, oh, it's not a right or wrong. It's just there are different ways to do things. And you can be so much more flexible with products that aren't already, put together in a certain way. So for instance, just dumb things like you can just give somebody one page of something, or just give them the end, or what. You just have a different kind of flexibility. That said, I mean, I love books. There's nothing bad about them. It's just that they can be prohibitively expensive, and the publishers are really struggling. They are really struggling to make money. And the fact that all of us have printers, really, it just changes everything around a little bit. So, I mean, my experience has been nothing but good. And I think, I suspect keeping track of all of your music and working with a publisher who's capable of keeping track of all of it is also a very important piece of it, right? Because I think if I were working with somebody who I felt like wasn't really on top of the entire business, I would feel very different. But that is not the case.
I love how you're using the flexibility that digital products provide to actually be more responsive to your students and to fulfilling all of their needs. I think that's a really cool angle, and one that I haven't heard anybody talk about so far. So,
well, it's just a different way. It's a certain kind of flexibility, right? That you just don't have when, yes, there's a place where in the middle of, whatever happens, we stop correcting things. You decide it's done. I'm not saying that there isn't that place. It's just that the ability to turn on a dime should something actually be wrong, or not even be wrong, just you want to add to something, is really unique in this particular time.
Bigger question, harder question. What do you hope to be known for?
Oh, wow. What do I hope to be known for? I hope to be known as a good mother. I've got 2 grown kids who are decent people. I'm proud of that. What would I like to be known for? I think I'd just like to be known as a good musician who encouraged others to be the best musicians they could be. I mean, one of the things that's important to me is creating community and creating loving long-term relationships. So, you know, I'm very, very careful about the students that I take because I know they're probably going to be there for a long time. And so I try to really only take people that I actually really, really like and that I think really like me. Because a lot of times I get people that think they like me, but they actually don't like me. That they want me to be much more conservative or beat their kids up a lot more, you know, and berate them and stuff, which I just won't do. But I think, you know, I'd just like to be known as a decent person. Okay, dog owner. You know, I mean, I don't feel like I'm going to leave my mark on the world in some way that's going to change people's lives with my music. I really don't feel like that. But I do feel like if I can make kids experience learning how to play the piano a more rewarding and interesting and fun experience, then that's a good thing to have done. And I just hope people, you know, I certainly don't think of myself as a great composer. My music isn't going to stand for, you know, 400 years and people will be thinking, oh, I can't wait to play October Song. But I think it performs a really important service. And so I feel fine about that. You know, I feel just fine about that. And I you know, I love teaching and I love, for me, I really find it rewarding, particularly with my adults, to kind of untangle them technically. Because almost everybody that comes to me, I guess I could probably say everyone who comes to me has their own story in their body of the traumas that they've had and the difficulties that they've had. And so helping people to be able to play more freely and have a good time that's very rewarding for me.
That is a wonderful answer.
Well, I don't know.
I think it's great. Thank you so much for being here today, Diane, and for sharing your wisdom and all of these great ideas that you shared with us today. I'm really, really grateful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. It's fun to talk to you.
Excellent. My guest has been Diane Hidy. You can find her publications online at composecreate.com, as well as from a local music retailer near you. Check out her website. We'll make sure we link it in the description below. And if you found today's video useful, as always, give me one of these and make sure you subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much.